Drone attacks sparking major fires at one of the world's largest oil processing facilities in Saudi Arabia. The billowing smoke seen in these satellite images. Houthi rebels in Yemen claiming responsibility for the attack, saying they were able to exploit vulnerabilities in Saudi Arabia's air defense system.
These are $10,000, $20,000 drones that are defeating air defense systems that cost hundreds of millions of dollars.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo directly blaming Iran, tweeting, Tehran is behind nearly 100 attacks on Saudi Arabia. Amid all the calls for de-escalation, Iran has now launched an unprecedented attack on the world's energy supply. This could heighten tensions between the U.S. and Iran.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the joint staff who had used to work for me, and one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran." I said, "Is it classified?" He said, "Yes, sir." I said, "Well, don't show it to me." And I saw him a year or so ago, and I said, "You remember that?" He said, "Sir, I didn't show you that memo. I didn't show it to you."
I'm sorry, what did you say his name was?
I'm not going to give you his name.
So go through the countries again.
Well, starting with Iraq, then Syria and Lebanon, then Libya, then Somalia and Sudan, and then back to Iran.
Look at that thing. A gigantic edifice behind us is the Ronald Reagan Building and International Trade Center. As Matt and I were exploring this and other buildings in the DC area, this building in particular prompted us to think about international trade. You've probably heard about the TPP by now. It's enormously controversial, but there is another question that we have been asked about for years on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, email, and more, and that is this: what is a petrodollar? Would people really wage a war for it?
From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. Here are the facts. Every country on the planet is also a financial trader, hoarding currencies, bonds, and other financial instruments as a way to retain stability during uncertain economic shifts. Today, the US dollar has often been called the world's reserve currency. But what is it based on? In some circles, analysts believe the true value of the dollar is based on its popularity as the means of exchange for international oil sales, leading traders, investors, and policy wonks to refer to it as the petrodollar. So what is this exactly, and why should it matter to you? Here's where it gets crazy. The petrodollar may have much more of an impact on global stability or instability than it initially appears. According to author James Rickards, the US dollar has been the world's dominant reserve currency since the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944, which set forth global rules for monetary policy. As analysts at JP Morgan write, under the terms of the Bretton Woods Agreement signed in July 1944, the United States agreed to exchange US dollars for gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. Currencies of signatory nations were pegged to the US dollar within a 1% deviation limit. Central banks would buy or sell US dollars to keep their currency within the permitted fluctuation band. Thus, the US dollar became the world's official reserve currency. As of 2014, over 60% of all global reserves are in US dollar-denominated securities. But the dollar isn't based on gold anymore. Rickards argues that the dollar has been propped up by the petrodollar, the use of currency as the primary means of trading fossil fuels. According to the story, in the 1970s, Henry Kissinger approached Saudi Arabia with an intriguing offer. The US would guarantee the continued security and rule of the House of Saud if they agreed to price all oil in US dollars. According to Rickards, the arrangement soured when President Obama initiated détente with Iran, a move he argues Saudi Arabia saw as an act of betrayal. This, coupled with other factors, the changing trade relationships, the current energy boom, and more, may spell trouble for the US dollar's position in the world order of cash. So how far will the US go to protect the status of the petrodollar? Some theorists such as Jerry Robinson, William R. Clark, and F. William Engdahl believe protection of the petrodollar is the ultimate cause for many recent U.S. wars, including the invasion of Iraq and the toppling of Gaddafi in Libya. According to this idea, the U.S. invaded Iraq in 2003 when Saddam Hussein moved to sell oil in euros. This remains a controversial concept even more than a decade later, but various quotes from government officials seem to confirm the importance of this resource in global conflicts. As former chairman of the Federal Reserve Alan Greenspan wrote, "I am saddened that it is politically inconvenient to acknowledge what everyone knows. The Iraq War is largely about oil." For years leading up to and following the various wars, invasions, and attacks in the Middle East, the U.S. official line has referred to stability. But stability of what? According to Rickards, Clark, and others, that's something they don't want you to know.
Yemen's Houthi rebels claim they have deployed 10 drones to attack a processing plant and an oil field owned by the Saudi Arabian state-owned oil giant Saudi Aramco.
We exploited vulnerabilities in the Saudi defense system, and we built our drones in order to avoid these systems. Therefore, the Saudi and Emirati airspace became open to us after their defense systems failed to even spot our drones.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has rejected the claim in a tweet, saying there is no evidence the drones came from Yemen, and has blamed Iran for the attacks. In his tweet Sunday, U.S. President Donald Trump threatened consequences for the culprit and is waiting to hear from the Saudis as to who they believe it to be. Earlier Sunday, Iran's President Hassan Rouhani denied Tehran's involvement.
Americans, instead of confessing that their presence in the region, in Syria and Yemen and other areas, has been problematic, every now and then accuse the countries in the region and brave fighters of Yemen.
Tehran-backed Houthis have been fighting a Saudi-led coalition since ousting Yemen's president in 2015. Pompeo has repeatedly accused Iran of destabilizing the region.
It supports proxy militias and terrorist groups. It is an arms dealer to the Houthi rebels in Yemen, and Iran conducts cyber hacking campaigns.
Saudi officials say no one was killed in the Saturday attacks, but that the oil production had to be suspended. Energy Minister Abdulaziz bin Salman said some of the fall in production would be made up with oil from Saudi Arabia's huge storage facilities. But analysts warn that if the Saudis cannot turn production back on quickly, the gas prices could go up worldwide. Saturday's attacks came just days before the opening of the UN General Assembly on Wednesday. Zlarica Hoke, VOA News, Washington.